Colton, I'll start with you. Your observations as you stood there. You're right there when Mr. Carney was talking and as the ministers walked up. I think we have Colton.
And even the new Liberal MPs who came into this were Liberal MPs that most of us who follow the Hill very closely are immensely familiar with. These are, by and large, people that we've seen, handling press, being the ones to stop and speak with media. And so I really wonder how much change it is that we are actually seeing in this. I thought it was quite interesting that we saw David Johnston. We also saw Michel Jean, former Governor General as well, heading into this. There is a little bit of that, kind of as Lisa put, push to recenter on not just the new direction of this party, but the past of this party as well, the past before Justin Trudeau, and a return perhaps to a little bit more of a centrist Liberal party. I think that was the thing that stood out to me the most among these guests of honors that we're seeing arrive other than the cabinet ministers.
Mike, what about you?
Yeah, I think, picking up on what Colton is saying, I think, when you consider the size right now. I mean, we were all being told possibly 15 to 20, and now I think we're counting over 20 at this point. So this isn't that much of a slimmer cabinet. It is significant when you come down from 37 ministers, including the Prime Minister, and really the signals that they're trying to send with who they are putting in what position, making sure that these people have their hands on it and really combining a lot of these ministries and moving some people out of positions like Stephen Guilbeault, who was Environment and Climate Change Minister. I think moving him, giving him a bit of a break from that, but at the same time keeping him in the fold, I think is an interesting move as well, Vashi, when you consider how much of a lightning rod he's been, especially to somebody like Danielle Smith, Alberta's Premier, and out west as well. Keeping somebody like Wilkinson, Jonathan Wilkinson as Natural Resources Minister, I think will be key when you consider how much that will be central to these discussions with the United States. We know that President Trump wants Canada's natural resources. He's said as much, and to have somebody like Jonathan Wilkinson, who does have a lot of experience in that field in business. We also understand that he and Mark Carney have been friends for a number of years. He's been a very vocal supporter of Mr. Carney as well. So that doesn't surprise me, but some of the new faces I think are a bit of a nod to the regional representation when you consider that Cody Bloy is somebody from Atlantic Canada. They need to try and make sure that they are extending an olive branch out east as well. And it'll be interesting to see going forward. Mark Carney talked about action-oriented. That really business speak. When a lot of people look at this, we, as a country, are now going to be run by somebody who has a long time and a lot of experience in business. So the possibility of this country being run more like a business, I think, are what Canadians might be able to look forward to, Vashi, as well as that action-oriented, getting down to work, and to the point that a number of people on the panel have been making. They don't have a choice but to do that right now. They have to make sure that they are at the task at hand, because we know April 2nd is coming very, very quickly. And following that conversation in that meeting yesterday with Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary in D.C., there were positive signs, but at the same time, they need to make sure that they are having those conversations at the table, and that you have to wonder how soon after today, how soon after the writ is dropped, will we possibly see Mark Carney take a side trip from the campaign to go to D.C.? Will he be seen with Donald Trump? Will he go into the Oval Office? We know that Carney had said in his conversations and in some of what he said publicly, he will only do that and if the meeting is respecting Canadian sovereignty and making sure that that issue is off the table. So I think, we will see those types of lines going out today, and that type of, focus of this cabinet as well, Vashi.
That's Mike Licouture and Colton Pearl on the grounds. They're outside at Rideau Hall. You're looking live inside Rideau Hall, where the swearing-in ceremony is supposed to get underway in 10 minutes' time. I got to tell you, I've covered about a million of these at this point. The fact that there's about 10 people in the room does not bode well for that timeline. So we will keep our fingers crossed and keep our eye in that room. I'm here with Nick Nanos, Kathleen Monk, Lisa Raitt, and Scott Reed. I think, jumping off, Nick, what Mike mentioned, I mean, like, we're talking about this in a way as though this is like a brand new cabinet. It's like there's an election a week and a half away, right? Like there's many differences between now and 2015. 2015, they just won a massive mandate and they were beginning a 4-year term. This is something that effectively will be in a campaign 10 days from now.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's been a lot of talk about action and lots of action and stuff like that. He's never been elected to anything. And this government doesn't really have a mandate, right? This new government and this new cabinet doesn't really have a mandate. It's a caretaker from the previous administration. I think I would be surprised if this new Mark Carney cabinet decides to do a lot in a short period of time or have a bunch of announcements. I think if it's going to be about focus, you know, focus of the cabinet and a streamlining of the cabinet, focus of his efforts and energy, I would expect only a couple big things to be announced and not a lot, because people are going like, what's up with this? There's going to be an election. What are you doing stuff? You haven't been elected. And, you know, Canadians have not had a chance to render their vote and either to support or not support what Mark Carney will end up proposing.
My guess, I don't know, I maybe guess a little bit differently, Scott, in that I think that they will want to convey, maybe not 13 in the first day, but they will want to use the ability to govern to their advantage politically, just like we saw in the Doug Ford campaign, for example.
Yeah, and I agree with Nick in that you're not going to see a cascade of announcements about a wide variety of topics. That would make no sense. But you may see a handful of announcements, and some very high profile and focused, all around the subject of our relationship with the United States, our ability to sustain and protect our economy. I mean, if he goes to Europe, well, he's going to Europe to get a deal. If he goes to the Oval Office, he's going to make a point. So that's what I think, you know, you're going to see actions of that sort, or the possibility of those actions. What are you going to do with respect to efforts to protect Canadian industry and workers? Will we see, without the House in session, will we see an announcement of what his program would be in the next legislative session to provide those kind of support? And people have talked about, you know, COVID-level support programs. I don't know if it would be that large, but saying to people, listen, if Trump is going to impose hardship on us, then government is going to be an instrument to help sustain and protect you, not just broad industry, but individual workers as we bear that assault.
Strategically, Lisa, you've got, let's say, 10 days between now and the election call. How do you use it to your, I guess, political advantage in that interim, in your view?
Yeah, I think the biggest decision they have to make is whether or not he seeks an audience with Donald Trump, because it could either end spectacularly well or he could get Zelensky'd. And neither of those, you just don't know which outcome you're going to get. So that's the one they're going to have to think about the hardest, I believe, and make sure that they seem to be doing something on the file regarding the United States, short of going down and seeing the president himself. But Fashi, I'm just going to get squishy for a second and say, for the families that are arriving for this moment, I mean, it is a pretty special moment to have your loved ones sworn into cabinet. If for the first time, people who are swearing into cabinet or are getting a new position. When you come in, there's a lovely Canadian Forces Quartet that plays music for you. You're in a beautiful room. I mean, for the moment that they're experiencing right now, it is a really cool thing. I know that we're the ones talking about all the politics around it, but I just want to say to the families who are watching and excited for their loved ones, it is a really cool thing. And enjoy the half an hour that it's going to be calm, because after that, you're not going to see your family member ever again, not for at least 7 weeks.
You can be squishy. Yeah, you can be squishy all you want. I think Canadians are, you know, we can talk about the politics, but we're also in a moment where I think collectively, regardless of political stripe, we're all happy to see the process of democracy unfold in our country with integrity as we watch what's happening south of the border in such a different way. Kathleen, we're just watching, by the way, if you are just joining us, we're a few minutes out, maybe, from the start of the swearing-in ceremony. The room rather certainly is building up. We had started talking off about like what the picks might mean politically, particularly where regional interests are concerned and where an election is concerned, right? Like who are you trying to, I guess, cultivate an audience with, or you know, who do you have electoral interest in? What, based on what you've seen so far?
Yeah, I think we have to look at today's cabinet picks also through the electoral lens, right? Not just the regional and gender, you know, balance. It's actually who has an organization behind them, who can mobilize folks on the ground, volunteers, also who can raise money, right? That is part of this decision. That's why you see people like Mélanie, Joly, François-Philippe Champagne staying in cabinet. cabinet. These are big players. They organize, big organizers in Quebec. They can deliver. And Carney needs to keep them not only happy because they're competent cabinet ministers, but he also needs to keep them because he needs them for the election. Any of the announcements for the next few days, what Carney's going to do is he's going to try to suck up that earned media, right? If I was him, advising him, which I'm obviously not, I would say do not go to the U.S. I think it's a brilliant move going to Europe. Not just, as Lisa said, you beget Zelensky's. Also, look at the Prime Minister of Ireland. He didn't fare that well in that meeting either.
UK Prime Minister.
Yeah, there's so many you can list. Like, it's just, it's not, the odds are not on you doing well if you sit down in that Oval Office with Mr. Trump. So I think that that's the wise move. Eat up all the earned media you can. Have a few announcements which will roll into your electoral platform and get yourself running. I'm not worried about the candidate numbers that Nick cited earlier. Listen, people who are political strategists who run campaigns, we know we can fill those slots very quickly, especially if you're building on momentum like the Liberals are right now. They can fill those slots. So that's not really a metric that I would look at. I would look at dollars in the bank, fundraising numbers. I would look at media mentions, earned media, and if he can sustain this, and if he wins the framing war.
All right, former Governor General David Johnston making his way in. You can see at the front of your screen another former Governor General, Michaël Jean. We are going to take a quick commercial break, but this ceremony is slated to get underway shortly after we return from that break. Our special coverage continues in just 2 minutes. Stay right there.
Welcome along to the Australian Grand Prix on TSN and TSN+.
I'm Francesco Mutti, and nobody loves tomatoes as much as I do.
So you can enjoy the freshness and taste of Mutti tomatoes. Mutti, one family, one passion. Tomatoes.
Shop and get dirty. Get dirty. Get dirty. Get dirty. Shop and get dirty.
You know, retirement doesn't have to mean giving something up. It should mean living life on your own terms. Well, thankfully, if you're a Canadian homeowner, age 55 and better, you can access some of your home's value in tax-free cash with CHIP. That way, you can live retirement on your own terms. Stay in the home and the neighborhood that you love. Because there's no place like home. Right, Rocky?
If you're 55 or older, call now for your free, no-obligation CHIP reverse mortgage guide. With CHIP, you could get up to 55% of your home's value in tax-free cash. Take only what you need in a lump sum or over time with no monthly mortgage payments required. Call 1-866-519-2447.
Maybe it's time for you to consider CHIP too.
Call now for your free, no-obligation guide. Call 1-866-519-2447. That's 1-866-519-CHIP. Or visit chip.ca. Call CHIP today and live retirement your way.
Swiss Chalet's Seafood Fest is back. Hurry in for Canada's famous rotisserie chicken paired with garlic shrimp, our delicious fish and chips, fish sandwich, or our popcorn shrimp appetizer. All here for a limited time, starting from only $16.99, only at Swiss Chalet.
Limits aren't there to stop us. They're there to challenge us, test us. So when we push past those limits, we discover how far we can really go. The Jeep No Limits event is back. Get up to $8,800 in total incentives on Jeep Wrangler, or up to $6,700 in total incentives on Jeep Grand Cherokee, or lease a Jeep Compass North for $99 a week for 54 months with $1,095 down at 2.49%, 4.06% APR. Jeep, there's only one.
A performance that truly matters. This is what you've been waiting for. Returning to 9 cities across Canada, starting March 21st. Tickets at genuine.com.
Whoa, how'd you get your teeth so white?
You gotta use the right toothpaste.
Dr. C?
Not all toothpaste whiten the same.
Crest 3D White removes 100% more stains for a noticeably whiter smile.
New personal best.
Crest.
Are you looking for a walk-in tub for you or someone you love? Well, look no further. A Safe Step walk-in tub is the best in its class. Now, for a limited time, when you purchase your brand new Safe Step walk-in tub, you'll receive a free safety package. And if you call today, you'll also receive $1,500 off your entire order. Yes, $1,500 off. Call today and receive a free safety package, plus $1,500 off.
Welcome back to our special coverage of Mark Carney's swearing in. I'm Vashi Kapelos in Ottawa. A few blocks from where I sit at Rideau Hall, we can take a live look inside the room where that swearing in is slated to get underway any moment now. Former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien just took his seat alongside other former Prime Ministers, or sorry, former Governor Generals, my apologies, Michael Jean and David Johnston. You've got the Chief of Defence Staff attending, as well as the head of the RCMP. Michael Duhem, and a number of other familiar faces, families, of course, and friends of the ministers who are about to be sworn in. About 24, including the Prime Minister, will make up the final table. And again, that ceremony is slated to get underway any moment now. Colton Prale is just outside that room, outside the front gates. Adrian Clarkson, another former Governor General there. Colton, your thoughts on who we've seen arrive so far? I think I'm just looking now if I could see who that is inside. But in any event, lots of former Governor Generals, former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, and then, of course, some newly minted. There's Jerry Butts, former Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, now, of course, and Marco Mendicino, another. He's serving as Chief of Staff to Mark Carney. Wow, some of it feels new, Colton, and a lot of it feels like this was 10 years ago.
Oh my gosh, does it ever? Yeah, I mean, you're getting two kind of different messages here, and I think you can see it even in the cabinet ministers who have been brought in into the fold here. There is a little bit of change for sure. It certainly feels a little less Justin Trudeau than it could have, but it also doesn't feel all that different. We saw so many familiar faces on the walk-in, so many ministers keeping their job in cabinet. Now, whether they keep the portfolio or not, that part remains to be seen. But in large part, these are faces that we are so familiar with. And if the messaging, as we heard from Mr. Carney, is about focus, it's about action, and it's about change primarily. Some of the question marks I have are around that change. Even if you are changing back to an earlier version of the Liberal Party and you're trying to center that around someone like Jean Chrétien and rebrand what this party is about and return to some of those roots, try to bring back, some red Tories, for example. The question is, how successful can you be if you're also bringing in a cabinet with Chrystia Freeland? You're also bringing in a cabinet with Stephen Guilbeault. Are Canadians going to buy that? I think if we're having this conversation, you and I, around what that political impetus is, whether it's something that is going to be feasible for Mr. Carney, it's certainly going to be on the minds of Canadians. And just going around speaking to people over the last couple of days in advance of this, the biggest thing I've been hearing in my personal life is that desire for change, is that desire for the feeling of something different. And will this backtrack on some of the goodwill that was gained over the weekend at the Liberal convention and the real sentiment that there was change there, certainly among Liberals? Will Canadians feel the same way, seeing so many of the same cabinet ministers, seeing some of the same cabinet ministers in incredibly high-profile portfolios being the ones who are standing there talking about trade issues, talking about tariff issues? Is it going to be believable, or is it going to feel like, as Lisa put it earlier in the show, the same government more or less seeking a fourth mandate? I think that's the real challenge that Mark Carney is going to run into, and certainly that's going to be one of the biggest questions I have for him when he comes out after the swearing in and we get a chance to speak with the new Prime Minister, is just how new all of this actually is.
So if you take a look inside this room as it does begin to fill up, a couple of different scenes emerging, and you are looking live right now inside the room where the swearing in of Mark Carney and his cabinet will take place. On the left, you see a lot of former Governor Generals, including David Johnston, Michael Jean, and Adrian Clarkson, alongside former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. They seem involved in a pretty specific conversation. That's Nat and Obed walking in as well. To the right of them, you can see almost at the corner of your eye a series of very familiar faces who are involved in the transition, and some of whom might be involved in the Mark Carney government after, if they are successful in an election. I'm talking about former Justice Minister David Lametti, former MP or outgoing MP Marco Mendicino. David Lametti, I'm told, would serve as a principal secretary moving forward. Marco Mendicino is currently the chief of staff to Mark Carney during this transition period. And then in the middle of them, once it swings back, we'll certainly be able to see, is Gerry Butts. Gerry Butts was the architect of one of the main architects of the 2015 campaign, and certainly by the Prime Minister's side for a number of years thereafter, until he resigned as principal secretary alongside Chief of Staff Katie Telford. They were two of the kind of constants in the first and most of the second mandate of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So an interesting mix. Again, the theme of change and focus and action, one that the Mark Carney camp has certainly signified to reporters, or signaled to reporters, that they want to be able to communicate rather today through to Canadians. The room almost at capacity. I'm also joined right now by Scott Reid, Kathleen Monk, Nick Nanos, and Lisa Raitt. Scott, I'll start with you. Your thoughts as you watch this room fill up, and we've got the Chief of Defence Staff walking in, just past David Lametti at the moment.
Well, I'll echo something that Lisa said earlier, which is that lost in all the political calculation is the fact that this is an extraordinary event for people who are participants. And I remember the day that Mr. Martin was sworn in, being at Rideau Hall, and how exciting it was and how unique it is for the families. Now I'll move to raw politics. Unfettered raw politics. I think the most interesting aspect of what's happening, you want to talk change, one of the things that's changing are the polls in Quebec. And I think there's some interesting dynamics happening with the choices they're making in Quebec cabinet ministers. There are some high-profile folks who are gone, like Mark Miller, but they're keeping Guilbeault, moving him out of the sensitive portfolio of environment, where, you know, they want to signal change from the carbon tax, but maintaining his status as a minister and giving him this position of Quebec lieutenant. He's got a large reputation. He's extraordinarily well known across the province of Quebec. You see the Bloc dropping in terms of support as his focus on Trump, trade, the vulnerability of the Canadian economy to abuse from the United States. Quebec seems to be rallying around Mr. Carney, even though his French is no roaring hell. And it's interesting to me that that dynamic is unfolding. That's one of the most principled objectives of the next number of weeks. Maintain that momentum, sustain it, and build on it, because those are seat-rich changes. When the Bloc drop 10 points and the Liberals move into that space, there's a ton of seats to be had there.
You just really want to know what David Johnston and Jean Chrétien are laughing about at this very moment. But building Nick off of what Scott is...
Netflix shows.
Yeah, maybe, I
Games.
guess. Building off of what Scott is saying, Stephen Guilbeault staying and getting sort of a Quebec lieutenant, but also like an identity, a portfolio related to culture and national identity. That's going to be something interesting to see as well, and the reaction to that, because he is one of the more like the political lightning rods, I guess you could call it, particularly between the Liberals and the Conservatives.
You know, absolutely. And, you know, the thing is, to Scott's point about Quebec, you know, among the more dramatic changes has been in the province of Quebec over the last 6 to 8 weeks. You know, the Conservatives in the Nanos tracking at one point were like in the high 20s. They're now back in the low teens. The Liberals are back in the game in the province of Quebec. And one thing that we didn't know, Vashi, is that for any party to win an election, they need a regional base. And this is why Quebec is critical for the Liberals. Once the Liberals are doing well in the province of Quebec, then they can start to wage war in other parts of the country. And we're specifically, realistically talking about Ontario, because Ontario is really where the battle is going to be, and probably will determine who will be the next government.
I wanted to also ask Lisa about Chrystia Freeland, because we spoke so much about her, in particular in the lead-up, of course, to the Liberal leadership vote on Sunday. She ran, she came in second with 8% of the vote. Karina Gould also ran, ending up with about 3%. No invitation for Karina Gould. Interesting that Chrystia Freeland did get an invite. She will serve as Minister of Transport. What's your read on that?
What's wrong with transport? Why is everybody hacking on that? I loved it when I had that portfolio. I think it's amazing. And if I were to,
no one's hacking on it. She's just interesting. She's there.
It's such a demotion. But listen, I mean, in a time, what's interesting about the transport portfolio is this: is that if anything goes wrong in the transport system, and God, I hope nothing happens terribly horrible. But that is an area in which you're going to have a sure and steady hand. So it's not a bad idea to have somebody who's going to be able to focus and move forward if something terrible does happen with respect to anything to do with transportation. It's just a volatile area. You never know what can happen. So I don't think it's a bad thing. But I'll tell you what the gift is. That gift is seeing Mr. Lametti, Mr. Butts, and Mr. Mendicino all sitting there together, which I know I would dub the carbon tax chorus because they all sing from the same song sheet when it comes to the carbon tax. And if Mr. Carney wants to separate himself from the carbon tax, he's got a real hard time to do it, especially if Mr. Guilbeault is saying as of yesterday, look, I think it's a good policy. It's just the Conservatives. They're the ones that spent money and made everyone think bad things about the carbon tax, but it's still good. So is this going to be a carbon tax battle? Conservatives will want it to be a carbon tax battle. And in your front bench, you've got the people who were the most, I would say, vocal and defending it along the way. So it's not a bad day for Conservatives there.
Kathleen, what do you think about that?
Well, I think if Lisa's pointing to the staffers, which she is, in terms of Jerry Butts, I don't think Canadians know really who Jerry Butts is. People who are politically engaged, activists, they know who Jerry Butts is. And I do agree with Lisa on this, that it's a weird day to pop your head up. We've all known that, Jerry Butts has been kind of running the Carney campaign behind the curtains. But I don't know if I would, as a staffer, staffers are supposed to fall on their swords, stay in the curtain, behind the curtains. I don't know if I would have shown up today to Rideau Hall like he is obviously in the seats there. That said, what do I find interesting? I mean, we talked about the Quebec issue. When we think of this cabinet, we look at who's going to be named there. We have a number of strong voices. Rachel Bendenin has been elevated. She's from the Outre-mer region. They're keeping Guilbeault, as you mentioned, but that's because that seat of Laurier-Sainte-Marie, that often flips between Liberals and New Democrats. New Democrats have been running a strong candidate there. I think they needed to keep Guilbeault in that riding for a number of reasons, not only because he's incredibly popular across Quebec, but also that could be a takeaway potentially in that one riding of Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Obviously, we've already talked about Mélanie Joly and Champagne in terms of their representation across the province. But it is true that Quebec is the big enchilada of votes. And next, I would say Ontario and BC. BC is interesting to me because we don't see the Terry Beaches back in cabinet. Sure, Wilkinson is there, but there are other people, big voices, people like Joyce Murray, who are no longer in cabinet, who have been strong fundraisers and people who delivered for the Liberal Party time and time again. So what does the Liberals play in the province of BC look like now? Because they're going to have to win back and defend those seats against Conservative and New Democrats. That's often a three-way play. And to Ontario, obviously we're still seeing a lot of some of the new faces from obviously Atlantic, Cody Bloy, I think it is, as you mentioned, but also some new faces in Ontario. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah, it tells us something, Scott, right? As we continue to watch the room fill up. If you're just joining us now, we are about to get underway at Rideau Hall with the swearing-in ceremony for the 24th Prime Minister of this country, Mark Carney, alongside his cabinet. Your thoughts on sort of the electoral calculations of cabinet as we head into an election, Scott?
Yeah, I'll just pick up on the specific point that Kathleen was making about BC, because I think it's another one of those interesting places because so much has shifted electorally over the course of the last 6 to 8 weeks when we've seen the NDP collapsing in their vote. So the three-way races that Kathleen was talking about might vanish. They may become head-to-head battles with the Liberals and the Conservatives, and that obviously is a massive boost. That's a critical, essential factor for the Liberals that they're going to be competitive in those seats because, honest to Pete, like 8 weeks ago, you thought the Liberals were just going to get wiped out in British Columbia. Now, maybe not so much. And it'll be interesting to see if Mr. Carney has, in the course of the next week, 10 days, a couple of new names, a couple of new candidates that he might roll out in British Columbia. I'd be watching for that. So we've got this dose of people and their jobs in terms of cabinet, but there is a second shoe to drop, and that will be new candidates that he tries to introduce. All of this, however, is traditional detail politics that we pour over. I do think we have to constantly remind ourselves of how unique the circumstances that we're in. We are in this situation where we're almost certainly going to have a single issue campaign. It's going to be all about Trump, all about protecting ourselves, and really it's going to come down to a test of the people at the top of the ticket. Do you trust Pierre Poilievre to do that, or do you trust Mark Carney to do that? Today is going to be all about filling that sense of confidence for Canadians that Mark Carney's the right guy for the right job at the right moment. And I just think you're going to see sustained activity today at the press conference, announcements they make, and then candidates they roll out, policies that they champion, trips that they take, all between now and what's going to be an election call in, you tell me, 5, 6, 7, 8 days?
Like basically a week. Like we're gonna, all the things we're talking about are concentrated on essentially the next week. I think we are pretty close to the ceremony getting underway, pardon me, because we did just see Mark Carney's family arrive, including his wife, Diana Carney, who sits at the front row, which I think the the shot will show very shortly. There she is on the far right of that row. Nick, talk a little bit about, if we could drill down into what has materialized over the last 6 weeks and where it leads you regionally, especially to focus over the next 10 days and into a campaign.
You know, well, to Scott's point, you know, if we looked at the polling numbers at the beginning of January, it looked like the Liberals were dead on arrival. You know, the thing is they were 27 points back, and we're trailing basically in every single region of the country another party. You know, fast forward now, the Liberals are regaining some of the support that they lost in Atlantic Canada, probably poised to hold their gains, what they have there. Quebec is now looking much better for the Liberals, and you know, to the discussion about British Columbia, you know, British Columbia now has changed, and I think, you know, I wouldn't count the NDP out yet. You know, the Liberals are doing better, but I just think, you know, as a pollster, I always kind of, I'm uncomfortable doing predictions in British Columbia because it's very complex. The local campaigns matter. There are multiple parties that are competitive. And, you know, it's one of the few regions in the country where there's like 3-4 parties that can do well and can punch above their weight. And I think the only thing that hasn't really changed is the prairies, which has been a lock for the Conservatives and remains a lock.
Just a quick follow-up question as we wait for the official part of this ceremony to get underway. You look at trend lines all the time, right? Where is this? I mean, there's been so much change so quickly. Is this going to settle out? Is it going to go a different direction? Is it still on the ascent? Like, what is your sense?
I think it's still on the ascent, and it'll probably, unless there's some kind of mess up today, there'll probably be a little bit of a lift for the Liberals. Who knows how big it'll be? You know, the other thing is that we know in our weekly tracking that the proportion of Canadians that would be open to voting Liberal is now starting to trend up. That's a leading indicator. The proportion of Canadians that are open to voting Conservative is starting to trend down. That's a leading indicator for the Conservatives. So, you know, I think we could probably expect at least another lift for the Liberals 1 week, but then the election will start. And you know what, Vashi, the election is a massive reset button, because there will be equal focus between the different party leaders. Like the Liberals, they've got it made right now. They're the incumbent government. They're in the news. If Donald Trump's talking, they're going to be talking to the Liberal governments and who happens to be the Prime Minister. So it's a bit easy right now to kind of puff up your numbers. You know, it's when the rubber will hit the road when the election starts and we see equal coverage between the main federal party leaders, and that's when the real trend line is going to come out.
Lisa, as far as the Tories go, we've been focused very much on what the Carney camp is going to do over the next 10 days. What do you anticipate the strategy from the Tories will be?
I think it's going to be about pointing out the fact that this is a Liberal government seeking its 4th term. I think you would see a lot of tying back, especially in Ontario, given there's so many seats in play there, tying back to the last time Ontario gave a 4th term to a Liberal government. That would have been Dalton McGuinty to Kathleen Wynne, and just focus on those kinds of issues. Do you really want to go down that path again? You've had the experience. It's not a good thing. And let the election go where it is. But as I said before, you know, Jerry and Jody, they can go to whatever they want to go to in terms of ceremonies. But, you know, there's a lot of pictures that link Mr. Butts to Mr. Trudeau, and now Mr. Carney to Mr. Butts, and that's going to be all over the place.
And I think the ceremony is now getting underway. Everybody is standing up. We'll listen in live for a moment.
Excellence, le gouverneur général du Canada et Monsieur Whit Fraser.
You're looking live inside the room at Rideau Hall, where a swearing-in ceremony is moments away from getting underway. Ministers alongside Mark Carney, and there he is taking his seat next to his wife, Diana Carney, along with the Governor-General and her husband, Governor-General Mary Simon, all taking their place for this ceremony. The ministers are all stationed to the right of Mr. Carney. And there is the Governor-General and her husband, Whit Fraser. The ceremony, you know, will take place like ones that you've seen before, where different oaths are taken. It will conclude
Good morning, everybody.
probably in about about 30 minutes. Let's take a listen in as this gets underway.
Rideau Hall today for the swearing in of the 24th Prime Minister of Canada and the 30th Canadian Ministry. I'd like to take a moment to share with you a traditional activity that was initiated just prior to the beginning of the ceremony, the lighting of the hulik, a traditional Inuit lamp. This lamp is used in the north to bring light and warmth to the home. We light the hulik to mark important events such as today's ceremony. And we are grateful for the presence of Elder Canon Iga Atikutsiak from Arctic Bay, who lit the hulik and will remain and maintain its light and warmth throughout the ceremony. Nakumik. J'aimerais maintenant inviter l'aîné algonquin Verna McGregor à prononcer ses mots de bienvenue.
Verna McGregor of the Algonquin to say her welcome words.
Kwe kakina. Bonjour tout le monde. Hello,
everyone.
Very honored to be here today, and I'd like to welcome you to our traditional unceded lands here, and I'm very honored, Your Excellency, for the invitation. I do many openings for constituents in Ottawa here, but I always talk about the significance here because this is so special for us as Algonquin. We're known as the Mamaninawak, the nomads, and we're known for the birch bark canoe. And we would meet here in the summer prior to contact to talk about what's going on the land. But this confluence here is very special because it represents balance of the four directions, the four seasons, the four stages of your life. And so, and I find it interesting that Parliament and Rideau Hall and all the government headquarters are located here, because I think this is special too as well for leadership. And I'm honoring the new leader today too as well. And I was thinking about you today. I said it's like the geese, and you have the head, the person at the head, Ganiganich, and they face the head waters. And I think we're in for always challenges, but even more so today. So I'm going to honor you and all of you with a little opening prayer and thanking everybody. And so I say, miigwech. Ojenya gashkito, Jama Moundose Conche Nongo, Mame Kakina, Niganich. Schwemmishnoni Nabiges, Miguech Onje Kakinaga Gishen Danoje, Mam de Gay, Nindekimenon, Skyki Question Caso Nindekimenon. We don't Kakina Pamazaje Conje Nagadawamdan, Kakina Guch Nindekimenon, Mam de Gay Nishnabe Ki, Miguech Onje Kakina Ete Kijigo. Kizis to be kizis a shijanangsha. We don't con no commisnan on jay and agadawabdan kakina gutya nibi a shijnimishomsanan. Kizis on jay and agadawabdan kakina gutya pamad subject in his wagonshe. Migwech on jay na sewen kaki mijin chimino pamad zian on jay. We don't qua kakinan and Gino and Daganak, Nimshomsanan, the Gokmisnan, a shijnidon in his oche non gomonje, the Bashkadagma, Kamashed in his wagonshe. A shij kakinan and Gino and Daganak, and Wessi Sak, Mitigog, Mijaski, Mashkiki, Kakina Gagijendan. Kacheshquat negwe de Seaman, Kego Gajeman, Doshit Kan, and Oshgush negwe de Seaman. We don't qua kakina, Mam de Gay, we wisen a jig, the Mogs the jig, Akwas a jig. Kaye, we me God with jig non com chuana ki watch, Chimino Pamadzu watch. Miigwech. I say miigwech 4 times to honor again the 4 directions, the 4 seasons, the 4 stages of our lives. We come from spirit and we return back to spirit. We come from the earth, we return back to the earth. And in my prayer, what I'm saying is I'm thanking everybody to coming together here. And always a reminder too as well to look after the earth. Because again, one of the teachings is that we were all given the original instructions to look after the earth, because we all share the earth, we share the water, we share the air, and the fire of the sun, our internal fires. So that's why, again, Ganiganich, the one in front, it has a big responsibility. And that's why we're having this ceremony today. So miigwech everybody, and have a good day. Merci. Merci à tous.
Thank you, Elder McGregor. Merci, Annie McGregor. Mr. John Hannaford, the Clerk of the Privy Council and the Secretary to the Cabinet, will now seek the Governor-General's consent for the administration of the Oath of Allegiance, the Privy Councillor's Oath, and the Oath of Office to the Prime Minister-designate.
Excellency, the Prime Minister-designate has accepted your invitation to form a new government and is prepared to be sworn in. Excellence, le Premier ministre désigné a accepté votre invitation de former le gouvernement et disposé à servir.
To begin the ceremony for the swearing-in.
The Prime Minister-designate will please come forward to be sworn in. Le Premier ministre désigné est prié de s'avancer pour prêter serment. Mr. Mark Carney. Mr. Mark Carney.
Moi, Mark Carney,
I,
je
Mark
jure
Carney,
fidélité et sincère allégeance à Sa
swear
Majesté
allegiance, sincere loyalty to His Majesty King Charles I and his succession.
Do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, King of Canada, his heirs and successors. Moi, Mark Carney.
I, Mark
Je jure
Carney,
solennellement
I solemnly swear and sincerely swear that I shall act
servitude de Sa Majesté le Roi Charles III,
in loyal servitude to His Majesty of the King of Charles I for the Privy Council, and I will expedite faithfully and truthfully I will speak out my truth opinion sincerely on anything that happens in the Council. I will keep secret all that is revealed to me in this capacity, and everything that is done will be done secretly in the Council. I will act in all circumstances in faithful and loyal servitude to His Majesty.
I, Mark Carney, do solemnly and sincerely swear that I shall be a true and faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III as a member of His Majesty's Privy Council for Canada. I will, in all things, to be treated, debated, and resolved in Privy Council, faithfully, honestly, and truly declare my mind and my opinion. I shall keep secret all matters committed and revealed to me in this capacity, or that shall be secretly treated of in Council. Generally, in all things I shall do as a faithful and true servant ought to do for His Majesty. Moi, Mark Carney.
I, Mark Carney, I solemnly swear and promise sincerely, to the best of my knowledge and competence, that I will faithfully and honestly carry this authority and will deal with the responsibilities that have been done to me as Prime Minister.
Do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trust reposed in me as Prime Minister.
And with that, Mark Carney becomes the 24th Prime Minister of this country. You can see him there taking the oath, as well as now signing. We've got a close-up shot of that. Next to Governor-General Mary Simon, the Clerk of the Privy Council, of course, also involved John Hannaford. And now, after this part of it, after the swearing in for the Prime Minister himself, we will move on to a series of ministers. And I can tell you, as we watch this signing take place,
the Privy Council are signing the oath books to formally witness the swearing in of the Prime Minister, but they're also signing the instruments of advice nominating the new Canadian ministry.
And that new Canadian ministry does include a move for François-Philippe Champagne to the Ministry of Finance. Dominic LeBlanc moves away from that position and becomes the Minister of International Trade, as well as what's known as the President of the King's Privy Council for Canada. Anita Anand, who decided just a few weeks ago to come back into politics after saying she would not run in this election, becomes the Minister of Industry, taking over the portfolio for François-Philippe Champagne. Stephen Guilbeault not only becomes the Quebec lieutenant from being the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, but also takes on a new portfolio known as Minister of Canadian Culture and Identity, as well as overseeing Parks Canada. Chrystia Freeland, who contested the Liberal leadership against Mark Carney, does remain in cabinet. She becomes the Minister of Transport, but additionally, the Minister of Internal Trade. Internal trade has become a focus in particular, although discussed for decades, a focus in particular since Donald Trump started threatening tariffs. And she will be tasked with breaking down barriers associated with them. In an attempt to grow our economy against the backdrop of those threats. The Prime Minister now receiving a round of applause and a standing ovation from the room, which includes both his brother and his wife, and of course all the other ministers and their families as well. Mark Carney shaking the hand there of Whit Fraser, Governor General Mary Simon's husband, and Governor General Simon assuming her seat right next to the Prime Minister. The rest of the ceremony will now get underway. We'll take a listen in.
The swearing in of the 30th Canadian Ministry.
Les ministres et les ministres désignés sont priés de s'avancer pour prêter serment. L'honorable Dominic LeBlanc, ministre du Commerce international et des Affaires intergouvernementales et président du Conseil
Minister of International Trade and Interprovincial
Minister of International Trade and Intergovernmental Affairs and President of the King's Privy Council for Canada.
Moi, Dominic LeBlanc, je promets et jure solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre du Commerce international et des Affaires intergouvernementales et président du Conseil privé du Roi pour le Canada. I, Dominic LeBlanc, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of International Trade and Intergovernmental Affairs and President of the King's Privy Council for Canada.
Minister Dominic LeBlanc, who represents a riding in New Brunswick, the first cabinet minister to be sworn in. He has been at the helm of the Finance Department for the last number of weeks, but he has served in a number of different capacities in cabinet under former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He retains the portfolio of intergovernmental affairs. He was kind of the chief negotiator, if you will, between the federal government and provincial governments for the last number of years. But he now moves from finance to international trade, which does allow him to, I guess, stay at the forefront of negotiations with the United States. He was in Washington just yesterday, meeting with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Ontario Premier Doug Ford, and he seems to be the chief conduit between the White House, at the moment at least, and the federal government. It was supposed to be Mélanie Joly, but I don't believe she's there. She's still in Charlevoix. So she will be sworn in a little bit later today.
Is unable to join us this morning, but will be sworn in at a later time this afternoon. Maintenant, l'honorable François-Philippe Champagne, ministre des Finances.
The Honorable François-Philippe Champagne, Minister of Finance.
François-Philippe Champagne, who represents the riding Jean Chrétien did in Shawinigan, Quebec, becomes the finance minister. He previously served as industry minister. Anita Anand will take over that portfolio. François-Philippe Champagne, years ago, almost a decade ago, served as parliamentary secretary to then finance minister Bill Morneau, so he certainly has some experience with the file more generally, but he too will remain alongside Minister Joly and Minister LeBlanc at the helm of the Canada-US file.
That I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trust reposed in me as Minister of Finance. Thank you. Prime Minister.
Minister Champagne and Minister Joly were widely rumored to be considering a run at the Liberal leadership themselves. Both announced they would not to focus on the Canada-US file, but very quickly thereafter endorsed Mark Carney in his leadership bid. Minister Champagne was also alongside Minister LeBlanc yesterday in Washington for that meeting with Howard Lutnick. Minister Joly will be sworn in a bit later today. She is having some difficulty getting back from Charlevoix, Quebec, where she hosted other G7 foreign ministers.
Ministre de l'Innovation, des Sciences et l'Industrie.
I, Indira Anita Anand, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Innovation, Science, and Industry. Moi, Indira Anita Anand, je promets et jure solennellement et sincèrement qu'au mieux de ma compétence et de ma connaissance, j'exécuterai loyalement et fidèlement les pouvoirs et je m'acquitterai des responsabilités qui m'ont été confiées en qualité de ministre de l'Innovation, des Sciences et de l'Industrie.
Anita Anand, the MP for Oakville, who about 6 weeks ago said she would not be running again, changed her mind just a few weeks ago. Last Friday, I believe, she stood next to Mark Carney in her riding. She endorsed Mark Carney in his bid to become leader of the Liberal Party, and she becomes the Minister of Industry. She has served also in a wide variety of roles. She was most recently Minister of Transport, right before then Minister of President of the Treasury Board. She also, during the pandemic, which many of you watching might be most familiar with, served as Minister for Procurement. She was in charge of getting vaccines for this country and one of the most kind of front-facing ministers during the pandemic. So once again, she becomes the Minister of Innovation, Science, and
The Honourable
Industry.
William Sterling Blair, Minister of National Defence. L'Honorable William Sterling Blair, Ministre de la Défense nationale.
Blair, National Defense.
I, William Sterling Blair, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of National Defence. Thank you, John.
Former chief of police for Toronto, Bill Blair, keeps his role, the first minister we've seen so far to retain his position as Minister of Defence. He's been in that role since 2023, which he assumed from Anita Anand, in fact. A very significant portfolio at this moment in time, given the scrutiny over Canada's own defence spending. All leadership candidates in the Liberal leadership race had promised to accelerate the timeline put in place to meet NATO spending targets. Bill Blair himself talking about how that goal can be reached before 2032, which is the deadline or the outline put forward by the government last year. So a lot of focus on that portfolio going forward too.
L'Honorable Patty Hajdu, Ministre des Services des Autochtones.
Indigenous Services.
I, Patricia Hajdu, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Indigenous Services. Moi, Patricia Hajdu,
Patricia
je promets
Hajdu.
et déclare
solemnly and promise, or solemnly and sincerely, that to the best of my knowledge and skill I will execute truly and faithfully the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Indigenous Services.
So Patty Hajdu also retains her portfolio. She represents a riding in Thunder Bay in Northern Ontario. She also served in different capacities over her time in government, including during the pandemic as Minister of Health. She retains the portfolio of Minister of Indigenous Services. Gary Anandasangari also retains his portfolio of Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, but adds to it that he will become Justice Minister and Attorney General of Canada. So a little bit of a shuffling there of the way in which these ministries will work, at least, through an election, which of course could be called imminently. So Patty Hajdu, again, retaining her portfolio as Minister of Indigenous Services.
The Honourable Jonathan Wilkinson, Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. Honorable Jonathan Wilkinson, Ministre de l'Énergie et des Ressources Naturelles.
Minister of Natural Resources, Energy and Natural Resources.
I, Jonathan Wilkinson, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully and to the best of my skill and knowledge execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. I,
Jonathan Wilkinson, solemnly and sincerely promise and swear, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, shall faithfully the powers and trust reposed in me as Minister of Energy and Natural Resources.
Jonathan Wilkinson also keeps his portfolio at the helm of energy and natural resources. A lot of renewed focus on that, as well as the conversation turns in light of Donald Trump's tariff threat to a diversification of markets, the possibility of getting energy like oil and gas or critical minerals to different markets other than the United States. Interestingly, Jonathan Wilkinson becomes the sole representative, I believe, if I've done my calculations right, of British Columbia on this current cabinet, which has shrunk in size from 37 to 23 plus the Prime Minister. So Jonathan Wilkinson, who represents, I should say, North Vancouver, shaking the hand there of Stephen Guilbeault, former Minister of Environment. As he takes his seat, he will retain his portfolio helming energy.
The Honourable Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor, President of the Treasury Board.
Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor.
Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor, solemnly and faithfully swear that to the best of my skill and knowledge shall execute faithfully the powers and trust reposed in me as President of Treasury Board.
I, Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skills and knowledge, execute the powers and trust reposed in me as President of the Treasury Board.
Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor, who represents a riding in New Brunswick, in Moncton, in fact, retains her position as well as President of the Treasury Board. She hasn't been in that position for all that long, but she retains that role that oversees kind of the purse strings for government. She also served in a previous life, you could say, or in previous years as Minister of Health. So Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor assumes her position as President of the Treasury Board. She will retain that position, you could say, of course. And up next, we've got Stephen Guilbeault. Big shift here. He goes from being Minister of Environment and Climate Change to something called Minister of Canadian Culture and Identity, Parks Canada, and Quebec Lieutenant.
Canadienne, Parc Canada et Lieutenant du Québec.
And Quebec Lieutenant.
Minister of Canadian Culture and Identity, Parks Canada, and the Quebec Lieutenant.
Moi, Stephen Guilbeault, je promets et déclare solennellement
solemnly swear that I will truly and faithfully, that I To the best of my skill and knowledge, will execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Cultural Identity, Parks Canada.
Do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Canadian Culture and Identity, Parks Canada, and Quebec Lieutenant. Thank you. Merci, John.
Quebec MP Stephen Guilbeault assuming a brand new portfolio. One of the more significant shifts in cabinet, he moves away from environment and climate change. He's a well-known environmentalist from Quebec, I should say, who has led the file on environment and climate change and the policies pursued by the federal government, some popular, others like the carbon tax not. Mark Carney, of course, promising to get rid of the carbon tax as soon as he assumes office. Stephen Guilbeault becomes the Minister of Canadian Culture and Identity. We'll look to find out this afternoon exactly what that means.
Freeland,
He'll oversee Parks Canada and will also be the government's lieutenant.
Chrystia Freeland, Ministre des Transports et du Commerce intérieur.
I, Chrystia Freeland, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Transport and Internal Trade. Moi, Chrystia Freeland.
I, Chrystia Freeland, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers reposed in me as Minister of Transport and Internal Trade.
Chrystia Freeland, who previously served as Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister under former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, becomes Minister of Transport and Internal Trade. She ran against Mark Carney for the leadership of the party. She came a distant second, but ultimately did run against Mark Carney. They were friends, though. Before that, he is, in fact, the godfather of one of her children, and it looks like they remain friends after. She makes it into cabinet. Their other competitor, Karina Gould, did not get an invitation. She previously served as government House Leader, and she will be replaced by Ariel Kayabaga, who represents a London, Ontario
The Honourable Kamal Khera, Minister of Health. L'Honorable Kamal Khera, Ministre de la Santé.
Minister of Health.
I, Kamal Khera, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trust reposed in me as Minister of Health.
So Kamal Khera moves from the ministry that oversaw diversity, inclusion, and persons with disabilities to Minister of Health. She represents a riding in Brampton. She is one of the top fundraisers as well for the Liberal Party. I'm told actually only below in fundraising capacity the leadership candidates themselves. She, before that, served, I believe, during the pandemic as a minister who oversaw long-term care and some health-related portfolios. So she moves up to the portfolio of health. That's Kamal Khera. She represents a riding in Brampton, so in the Greater Toronto
The Honourable Gary
area.
Anandasangri, Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, and Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs. L'Honorable Gary Anandasangri, Ministre de la Justice,
The Honourable Minister of Justice and the Minister of Crown Indigenous Affairs.
I, Gary Anandasangri, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trust reposed in me as Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, and Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs. As Minister of Justice, I will see that the administration of public affairs is in accordance with the law. As Attorney General of Canada, I will uphold the Constitution, the rule of law, and the independence of the judiciary and of the prosecutorial function. Moi, Gary Anandasangri,
Gary Anandasangri, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, will execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, Crown Affairs and Northern Affairs, and as Minister of Justice, I will ensure the observance of the law, and as Attorney General, I will ensure the Constitution is respected, and rule of law, and judicial independence, and the prosecutorial independence.
Gary Anandasangri, keeping his portfolio that oversees Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs, but adding to it a significant portfolio. He'll be the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. He represents a riding as well in the Greater Toronto Area, just east of Toronto, in Scarborough, in fact. Shaking Whit Fraser's hand there and the Governor General, and he'll now sign his name as well. We're still awaiting about half of cabinet, so we're about halfway through at this point. Rachel Valdez, who previously served as Minister of Small Business, will come up to take the oath shortly. She will now become the Chief Government Whip.
The Honourable Rachel Valdez, Chief Government Whip. Honorable Rachel Valdez, Whip du Chef.
Chief Government Whip.
I, Richie Valdez, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Chief Government Whip. Moi, Richie Valdez, je promets.
I, Richie Valdez, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Chief Government Whip of the Canadian Government.
Rachel Valdez, who also represents a riding in the Greater Toronto Area, this time west of Toronto in Mississauga, moves from the minister who oversees the government's dealings with small business to Chief Government Whip. She takes over for briefly Mona Fortier, but before that, Ruby Sahota and Steve McKinnon, who have both served in that role as well.
L'Honorable Stephen Garrett McKinnon, Ministre de l'Emploi et des Familles.
Minister of Labour and Families.
Minister of Jobs and Families.
Jobs and Families.
Moi, Stephen Garrett
McKinnon, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will faithfully and truly, to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers trust reposed in me as Minister of Jobs and Families.
I, Stephen Garrett McKinnon, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Jobs and Families.
Steve McKinnon, who represents a riding over in Quebec on in Gatineau, rather, just over the over the other side of Ottawa. He's been in office since 2015, served in a number of different roles, most recently a similar portfolio, but he gets a different name. So it's going to be called the Minister of Jobs and Families. The portfolio was previously called Employment, Workforce Development, and Labor. So he kind of, I imagine, would retain the same responsibilities, but there is a shift in the naming convention there, which I imagine has some political or strategic significance, which we'll be talking about with the panel later. That's Steve McKinnon. He is the Minister of Jobs and Families.
L'honorable David Joseph McGuinty, ministre de la Sécurité publique et de la
Minister
Protection civile.
of Public Safety.
Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness.
Moi, David Joseph McGuinty.
I, David Joseph McGuinty, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Public Safety Minister and Emergency Preparedness.
Joseph McGuinty, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and the trusts reposed in me as Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. Thank you very much.
David McGuinty, who has been Public Safety Minister just since the end of last year, will keep that role. He was involved in a lot of negotiations with the United States when the threat of tariffs was directly linked to action at the border. Of course, since then, it's become pretty apparent that it wasn't just about that, but he has kind of been the lead on that over the last few months. He represents Ottawa South here in our nation's capital, and he is, if the name is familiar to you, likely that's because it is, the brother of former Ontario Premier Dalton McGuinty.
The Honourable Terry Duguid, Minister of Environment and Climate Change. L'honorable Terry Duguid, Ministre de l'Environnement et du Climat.
Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
I, Terry Gordon Duguid, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Moi, Terry Gordon Duguid,
do solemnly and sincerely swear and promise that I will, truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Terry Duguid, an MP in Manitoba for Winnipeg, the riding of Winnipeg South, to be specific, becomes the Minister for Environment and Climate Change, taking over the portfolio from Stephen Guilbeault. He also was, just before Christmas, named Minister of Sport and responsible for Prairie's economic development. It looks like those regional economic development agencies, or at least the overseeing of them by a minister, has collapsed. They're no longer assigned. There's one rural economic development, but the more regional economic development portfolios have been, I think, folded away or folded into something else. Terry Duguid becomes the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. He just became a minister a couple of months ago. He also is the co-chair, or at least was most recently the co-chair of the
Minister
Liberal
of Housing,
campaign.
Infrastructure and Communities. L'honorable Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, Ministre de Logement, de
Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
I, Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Housing, Infrastructure, and Communities.
So Nathaniel Erskine-Smith keeps the exact same portfolio, same name, all of it. He took over housing from Sean Fraser, who decided to leave politics. He became the Minister of Housing just at the end of last year. He represents a riding in Toronto, the riding of Beaches Eastwick, just on the east end of Toronto. He also ran for the Ontario Liberal leadership not too long ago. He retains his position as the Minister, effectively, of Housing. Housing, of course, and lack of affordable housing, a huge issue prior to Donald Trump becoming the big issue.
L'Honorable Rachel Bendayan, Minister de l'Immigration, des Réfugiés et de la Citoyenneté.
Immigration, Refugees, and
Minister of
Citizenship.
Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship.
Moi, Rachel Bendayan, je promets et déclare
I do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, to the best of my skill and knowledge, I will execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship.
I, Rachel Bendayan, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship. Thank you.
Rachel Bendayan, who has represented the riding of Outremont since 2019 in a by-election where she was able to flip the seat, which had previously been held by the leader of the federal NDP, Thomas Mulcair. She moves over from a portfolio she had just since the end of the year, just since December 20th, Minister of Official Languages. She now becomes the Minister of Immigration. She takes over for Mark Miller, who was dropped completely from cabinet, also a Quebec MP and a fixture in cabinet for a number of years. Also happens to be a close personal friend and ally of former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So Mark Miller out, Rachel Bendayan, the MP for Outremont, named Immigration Minister.
L'Honorable Elisabeth Pierre, Ministre des Anciens Combattants,
Minister of Veterans
du Canada.
and CRA.
Minister of Veterans Affairs and Minister responsible for the Canadian Revenue Agency.
Moi, Elisabeth Brière, je promets et
I do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers trust reposed in me as
en qualité de ministre des Anciens
Minister
Combattants et ministre
for Veterans
responsable de
Affairs
l'Agence du Revenu du Canada.
and a minister responsible for
Do
CRA.
solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Veterans Affairs and Minister responsible for the Canada Revenue Agency.
Elizabeth Brière is the MP who represents Sherbrooke. She has done so since 2019. She became the Minister of National Revenue in that cabinet shuffle at the end of last year. A little bit of a change here, the naming of the portfolio as well as the addition of another one. So she now is the Minister of Veterans Affairs, and the combination is she's also the Minister responsible for the Canada Revenue Agency. So a naming convention change as well. So now instead of being the Minister for National Revenue, she's overseeing or responsible rather, for the Canada Revenue Agency, the CRA, and she adds Veterans Affairs to that portfolio as well.
The Honourable Joanne Thompson, Minister of Fisheries, Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard. L'Honourable Joanne Thompson, Ministre des Pêches, des
Minister
Océans et des
of
Gardes Côtières Canadiens.
Oceans, Fisheries, and Canada Coast Guard.
I,
Joanne Thompson, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Fisheries, Oceans, and the Canadian Coast Guard.
Joanne Thompson, who represents a riding in Newfoundland and Labrador, one of the few MPs in Newfoundland and Labrador who have actually decided to run in the next election, moves from the Ministry for Seniors, where she has been just since the end of last year, over to the Ministry of Fisheries, Oceans, and the Canadian Coast Guard.
Ariel Kayabaga, Leader of the Government in the House of Commons and Minister of Democratic Institutions. Ariel Kayabaga, Leader du gouvernement dans la Chambre du Commune.
The Government, House of Commons, and Democratic Institutions.
I, Ariel Kayabaga, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, King of Canada, his heirs and successors. Moi, Ariel Kayabaga, je jure fidélité.
I do solemnly and sincerely shall be a faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III as a member of the Canadian Ministry.
I, Ariel Kayabaga, do solemnly and sincerely swear that I shall be a true and faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III as a member of His Majesty Private Council for Canada, and I will in all things be to be treated, debated, and resolved in Privy Council faithfully, honestly, and I truly declare my mind and opinion. I shall keep secret all matters committed and revealed to me in this capacity, or that I shall be secretly treated in council. Generally, in all things, I shall be a faithful and true servant out to do for His Majesty. Moi, Ariel Kayabaga, je jure solennellement et sincèrement
do solemnly and sincerely swear that I shall be a true and faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III as a member of His Majesty's Privy Council for Canada. I will in all things be treated, debated, and resolved in Privy Council faithfully, honestly, and truly. My mind and opinion. I shall keep secret all matters committed and revealed to me in this capacity, or shall be treated secretly in council. Generally, in all things, I shall do things as a faithful and true servant ought to do for His Majesty.
I, Ariel Kayabaga, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as the Leader of Government in the House of Commons and the Minister of Democratic Institutions. Moi, Ariel
Kayabaga, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will, truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, shall execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Government House Leader in the House of Commons and Democratic Institutions.
Ariel Kayabaga, has been a member of Parliament representing London, Ontario since 2021. She is one of the 3 new faces in Cabinet today. She takes over as the Government House Leader and Minister for Democratic Institutions from Karina Gould. Karina Gould ran against Mark Carney to become the leader of the Liberal Party. She finished in 3rd place. She is no longer in Cabinet. Ariel Kayabaga takes over for her in that portfolio. Once again, she'll be the Government House Leader, so she'll do the negotiations when Parliament resumes, if she retains that position, and if actually Parliament resumes and everyone comes back, because right now with the timing of an election, that is likely not going to be the case.
Cody Blois, Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food and Rural Economic Development. Cody Blois, Ministre de
Minister of Agriculture, Agri-Food, and Economic Rural Development.
I, Cody Douglas Blois, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, King of Canada, his heirs and successors. I, Cody Blois, do solemnly and sincerely swear that I shall be a true and faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III as a member of His Majesty's Privy Council for Canada. I will in all things be treated, debated, and resolved in Privy Council, faithfully, honestly, and truly declare my mind and my opinion. I shall keep secret all matters committed and revealed to me in this capacity, or that shall be secretly treated of in council. Generally, in all things, I shall do as a faithful and true servant ought to do for His Majesty. I, Cody Douglas Blois, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully and to the best of my skill and knowledge execute the powers and trust reposed in me as Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food and Rural Economic Development. Thank you very much. This with you.
Atlantic Canadian MP Cody Blois there. He represents a riding in Nova Scotia, takes over the portfolio of agriculture from longtime MP Lawrence McCulley, who actually was in office since 1988. He determined that he would not run again in the next election, and he combines with that portfolio rural economic development, which fell under Goody Hutchings, Newfoundland and Labrador MP, who also is not running. So the two of those portfolios have now been combined under Cody Blois, who becomes a minister for the first time. That's why his oath, as well as Ariel Kayabaga's and the next individual, Ali Assasi, their oath is a little bit longer than everyone else's for that reason.
Ali Assasi, Minister of Government Transformation, Public Services and Procurement. Ali Assasi, Ministre de Transformation du Gouvernement.
Government Transformation, Public Services and Procurement.
I, Ali Cyrus Assasi, do declare that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, King of Canada, his heirs and successors. I, Ali Cyrus Assasi, do solemnly and sincerely swear that I shall be a true and faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III as a member of His Majesty's Privy Council for Canada. I will, in all things to be treated, debated, and resolved in Privy Council, faithfully, honestly, and truly declare my mind and my opinion. I shall keep secret all matters committed and revealed to me in this capacity, or that shall be secretly treated of in council. Generally, in all things, I shall do as a faithful and true servant ought to do for His Majesty. I, Ali Cyrus Assasi, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Government Transformation, Public Services, and Procurement. Thank you.
Ali Assasi, who represents the riding of Willowdale near Toronto, another kind of GTA area riding since 2015, is the third and final new member to be, or a new minister rather, to be sworn in. He becomes the Minister of Government Transformation, Public Services and Procurement. That is a new name, at least in some respects. It's sort of a combination of The Ministry of Citizen Services, which was established back in July of 2023, Terry Beach, served as minister in that capacity. He has been dropped from cabinet. Procurement and public services were all together, but this idea of government transformation, that is new. We'll be looking to hear exactly what that signifies or the intent behind that naming change as well. But Ali Assasi, the
Governor General,
MP for Willowdale, becomes a minister.
Privy Council will now sign the oath books to formally witness the swearing in of these ministers.
The Governor General there, Governor General Mary Simon, signing her name to her left, John Hannaford, the clerk of the Privy Council, to her right, the new Prime Minister, Mark Carney. Mark Carney will also add his signature to that. The whole ministry comes in at a total of 23 ministers in this cabinet, including Mark Carney. That makes 24. Once the ceremony concludes, we are told that there will be a cabinet decision taken. And that announcement will come from Mark Carney. The content of that decision will be communicated from Mark Carney after the conclusion of this ceremony and the conclusion of that process. So we will, of course, stay on live throughout all that and bring it to you. 3 new faces in cabinet and some other shuffles as well.
Merci, thank you. The Governor General will now entrust the Great Seal of Canada to the custody of the Registrar General of Canada. Le gouverneur général confiera maintenant le Grand Sceau du Canada à la garde du
present the
Général.
Great Seal of Canada to the Registrar General of Canada.
I now invite Métis Elder Vito Westlake to offer closing words. J'invite maintenant Aîné Métis Vito Westlake.
I now invite our Métis leader to say a few closing remarks.
Tansi, we'll close with a prayer of gratitude. We thank you, Creator, for this day and for the democratic processes that have provided us with strong leadership, a new Prime Minister, and a new cabinet. We acknowledge and express gratitude for Canada and the Canadian values that sustain all of us, that provide us with freedoms within these values to help us become our best selves. We acknowledge and express gratitude for the Indigenous peoples of Canada who have always been the caretakers and protectors of our lands and waters, and who, generation after generation, have welcomed newcomers to their territories and provided them with a place of safety, security, and peace. We acknowledge and express gratitude for the ongoing commitment of Canadians to one another, to provide each other with necessities in times of need, for our commitment to education, social supports, and health services for everyone. We thank you also for the inclusivity of our cultural mosaic and our ongoing commitment to fight racism and discrimination wherever we find it. We acknowledge and express gratitude for our children, our families, and communities. We thank you for all of those who work tirelessly to ensure that our borders, our waters, and lands are healthy, protected, and that we are safe. We thank you for those who work tirelessly in the areas of climate change and climate change adaptation. As we welcome a new Prime Minister and a new Cabinet, we ask that you guide their steps and those of all of us in the days ahead as we work for the well-being of Canada and Canadians and for the well-being of our lands, waters, and the living beings living with us here on these, their traditional territories. We ask that our circle be strong, that our nation be healthy, strong, safe, and secure. Team Miigwech for all that you have given us. Merci.
Mesdames et messieurs,
ladies and gentlemen, please stand if you can and join Michelle to sing the national anthem and keep your places while the major people leave. Thank you for participating.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here today. Will you please rise if you are able to join Michael Carney in singing of the national anthem today? And following the anthem, please remain at your places for the departure of Their Excellencies, the Prime Minister, and members of the 30th Canadian Ministry.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true North strong and free. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits et ta valeur de foi trempée protégera nos foyers et nos droits, protégera nos foyers et nos droits.
Brings to a close the swearing-in ceremony for Mark Carney, who becomes the 24th Prime Minister of Canada, and his cabinet, who are now making their way outside. The size of the cabinet smaller than under Justin Trudeau. It goes from 37 ministers to 23, plus Carney himself. We do anticipate we will hear from the newly minted or newly sworn-in Prime Minister momentarily when he takes questions from reporters. As people file out there, I will head to my colleague, our senior political correspondent, Michael Couture, who is on the grounds just outside that room on Rideau Hall. I'm looking with great interest, Mike, at the press release that the government put out, that the Carney government now has put out. The quote that they offered from Mark Carney: "This team is built for immediate action and focused on protecting Canadian workers, supporting their families and growing this great country. We are changing how things work so our government can deliver to Canadians faster. And we have an experienced team that is made to meet the moment we are in. Our government, they write, is united and strong, and we are getting right to work. What do you think they hope the message around this cabinet sends to Canadians?
Yeah, I think it's just that this is essentially now going to be run not necessarily like a corporation, but certainly making sure that they are making these types of decisions based on good services for Canadians, but also protecting Canadian interests. That, I think, is clear in what he's been saying when he stopped earlier on before heading into Rideau Hall, talking to reporters and really trying to make sure that they are actioning those three things that they had said that they wanted to make sure: change, focus, and action. Clearly, these are the types of things, Vashi, that I think we sort of see more in a company than in a government, and especially the previous government. I would also note that in that ceremony, I thought what was interesting was body language. Mark Carney shaking a lot of hands and doing a lot of holding of elbows, as opposed to what we used to see when ministers were sworn in with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, oftentimes a big hug or some sort of emotional embrace with the minister. I think that Carney is really trying to sort of send a message to Canadians that this is how he's going to run this country and this is how they're going to go forward. I wanted to pick up on what you were mentioning when we had Ali El-Sassi introduced, and that sort of issue of Minister of Government Transformation. I put in a word to someone that is inside the Prime Minister's office of Mark Carney, and here is what they sent to me. The minister will begin a rapid change and modernization of the government, creating a new tech and AI-enabled advantage for Canada, also talking about improving the quality, efficiency, and productivity of Canada's incredible public service. And they're saying they're going to invest and ensure that our government and critical federal infrastructure are more resilient in the face of economic threat from the United States. So there again, I think trying to sort of give an idea to Canadians, especially when they say talking about the efficiency in the public service. That is something that Mark Carney has talked about during the campaign. A lot of people in the public service are concerned about how many jobs may be consolidated and may be lost, but it's clearly he is trying to make sure that the government is run like a machine now and run very efficiently, especially in the face of what we're seeing, as I had mentioned there in that last note, in the threat against Canada from the United States. So it'll be interesting to see how he picks up on that message when he comes out here to speak to reporters and essentially to Canadians his first time as the Prime Minister of this country.
Well, specifics will also be interesting, right? Because part of what he promised during the campaign was what he is calling like balancing the operational side of the budget, which is definitely not the sort of way that budgets are formulated at this moment in time. And he said, he'd retain all the big program spending that the government is currently doing, but address the inefficiencies, as he called them, through the public service. No specifics at this point on what kinds of cuts that would entail or what that looks like, but clearly an indication, as you point out, with the renaming of that ministry, the addition of that sort of portfolio, that it will be something that he intends to talk about, though, again, we don't have any specifics. Speaking of what he might talk about, it's been a while since he's taken questions from reporters. The people who are watching us right now can see to the right of you that there is a podium set up. We do anticipate we will hear from Mark Carney himself. What kinds of things do you anticipate he'll be asked?
Yeah, I think specifically around what he intends to do in this week or so, that I think a lot of people believe that he will be in government. I say believe because, widely believed and widely expected that, Parliament will not come back on March 24th as it is expected to or supposed to from prorogation. But I think specifically asking about what are you going to do in the face of Donald Trump? Are you going to try and get an audience with him? There is also these reports out there that he is planning some sort of a trip to Europe in the next week or so. We're trying to make sure, what that will actually entail. What is he trying to do? And what message would he be sending to the rest of the world in making that his first foreign trip, going to places like possibly the UK or France or even Italy? Unclear exactly where the schedule may take him. But what is that saying about what Canada is trying to do in our place in the past, we know that relations with the United States were so tight that oftentimes the first foreign visit of a president or of a prime minister would try and be to go to the United States. But obviously, these are different times now, Vashi, and I think that would send a message if he does do some sort of a trip like that, that Canada is looking beyond our shores for friends and trying to make sure that they are rallying a number of our allies, including the UK and France, to try and be on the same page and try and diversify our trade as well. We know that the Canada-UK trade agreement is still in the midst of trying to be negotiated, and that type of sort of reaching out could be that type of message sending to the rest of the world that, look, Canada is trying to find friends and trying to solidify those other allies around the world that maybe in the last few years Canada has strayed from because we have had that close relationship economically and politically with the United States, but certainly one that has been strained not only in the last couple of months, but a number of years under Donald Trump.
Okay, Mike, I'll leave it there. We'll check in with you over the next little while. I am here with Scott Reed, Lisa Raitt, Kathleen Monk, and Nick Nanos as we await Mr. Carney's entrance to that podium or walk up to that podium. Nick, I'll start with you. The list is out now. We know who's on it, the new faces, the people who retain their portfolios. What's the headline out of this cabinet choice for you?
I was smiling when you said list because I thought it was going to be like Santa Claus, like the list is out and who's on it and who's not. You know what I saw here was what I'll call a proto-platform, right? When it comes to the cabinet picks and stuff like that. This in the context of Europe, you know, one part being diversification and where the future is. Second part, you know, jobs, Minister of Jobs, and also government transformation, those being kind of probably the top three things for the new Carney administration. But, you know, the thing is really what today is about, like new prime minister, check, smaller cabinet, check. And here are our three priorities, whatever they might be. And you know, I think if he can stay on message, that'll be good. But he's going to start to get tough questions because now Mark Carney is prime minister and he's got to answer questions and he's going to have to explain what he's going to do over the next week. And to Mike's point, what will happen on the Donald Trump file? Why Europe so quickly? And he'll have to have those answers. And the other question will be like, someone's going to say, when's the election going to be?
Yes.
And
where are you running? We still don't even know that.
Is my top question. That's what I'm most interested in. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. Like, where are you running?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, we'll carry those questions and answers live as soon as they happen. Kathleen, what's your takeaway from what you see?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, in terms of the new faces that he's bringing in, Cody Bloy, I don't know, Bloy, it has a big shoes to fill. You know, Goody Hutchins, Lawrence Macaulay, you know, Darren Fisher is out of cabinet. He comes in, so got to represent that kind of traditional liberal stronghold of Atlantic Canada. Also interested to see, you know, some of the other new faces. The new Minister for Government Transformation coming from Willowdale, another new minister coming from London, Ontario. London, Ontario is a very typical, sometimes three-way, sometimes, you know, big race. Very kind of can be blue, orange, sometimes red. So to see those ministers come in, but I'm most interested, as I said, where is he going to run? When is the election going to be? You know, is he going to do anything like potentially roll out a speech from the throne, not at the House, but what else could he do? A budget, some kind of signaling about what his economic agenda could be. You know, when will the election be? Will he run in Don Valley West, as some people are saying, or is it going to be a safe seat in Toronto, another place in Toronto, or possibly the Yukon, as has been rumored?
Lots of questions. I hope they all get answered in a few minutes. Lisa, I was reading to Mike sort of what they put in the press release, which every government does, right? When they release the list of who's in the ministry, and it gives you a sense of, I guess, what they had hoped to accomplish. It also said this team reflects the ambition that makes Canada strong, and it will work each day to protect workers, families, and businesses. It will take action to unite Canadians, defend Canada's sovereignty in the face of unjustified trade actions by the U.S., make Canada an energy superpower in both conventional and clean energy, create new trade corridors with reliable partners, and build one Canadian economy, the strongest economy in the G7. Sounds like Mr. Carney wants this to be all about the economy.
Yeah, and they're going to do all that over 10 days because that's as long as this cabinet's going to be together. So take it for what it is. I would give this advice for anyone who wants to take it. Anything that rolls out of this cabinet, that rolls out of this prime minister, as official policy or something they're going to do, the AI stuff that was mentioned, these are all just election campaign promises. That's all that they can be. They have no supply of funds. They don't have a parliament to make changes. They're going into an election. I think that's pretty clear and apparent. So over the next 10 days, we'll hear about what the government wants to do. And they have absolutely, well, I can't say absolutely, they have very little power to actually implement. And I say I can't say absolutely because I don't know what they're going to come up with. But the AI stuff, they can't implement that. There's no money for that. There's a whole bunch of things that they can't possibly do. So take a look at the cabinet. What do we have? We are heavy GTA cabinet. Oh my gosh. Scarborough, Willowdale, Brampton, Mississauga, 3 downtown Toronto. I mean, that is where a battle is going to be. London, as Kathleen points out, Ottawa. This is where we're going to be seeing scrambling for votes. The other thing I would take away, I think he picked some of the most gifted communicators. To be honest, Stephen McKinnon, great communicator. Happy to see him back in cabinet, quite frankly. And then the last thing I would say, and I don't speak very knowledgeably about Quebec, but when I saw Mr. Guilbeault's, Minister Guilbeault's new title, all that said to me was Stephen Guilbeault is going to be the one in Quebec fighting against Pierre Poilievre as he campaigns on getting rid of the CBC. That's the clearest signal that I got in terms of what's going to go down and what that means on cultural identity. So it's an election-ready political cabinet meant to be able to get votes from Ontario and Quebec. And let's see where it goes in 10 days.
The regional stuff on Ontario and Quebec, like particularly the GTA, stuck out to me as well, Scott. Your thoughts on, I thought the two most significant name changes were government transformation and national identity and culture. What are your takeaways there?
Yeah, I think they were notable, and it gives you an indication of managerial impulse on the part of the new prime minister. Let's make things work. Let's get things done. Let's move away a little bit from the flamboyance and the big promises and the enlarged rhetoric of the Trudeau era. And then on the other hand, a raw political play, because I think Lisa's right. We're going to see the issue of RADCAN galvanize people across Quebec, and we're going to see Minister Guilbeault talk a lot about that. But, I also want to mention this, like, in addition to all the stylistic changes in terms of his managerial manner, like, we shouldn't overlook the fact that we are watching something we haven't seen before in history, right? Like, we've not had a prime minister come into office with no prior political experience, take that oath and lead that cabinet. That's never happened. We've not seen someone try to dig their party out of a deficit of 26%. Never happened before to be this far back. We've not seen someone, have to try to face down an American president who is hell-bent on not just destroying our economic relationship, but seems to want to trample on our flag and actually annex our territory. So we've got a historic moment here, and Carney, it's such an unprecedented set of circumstances that I really wonder if the Conservatives are going to have to up their game. They have so many advantages, obviously. They still have got to be the odds-on choice to win the next election. But I think they're going to have to up their game from sneaky Carney and elite Carney and globalist Carney, and Carney's just like Trudeau. We're in an unprecedented historic circumstance here with Trump and with a bunch of issues that are coming together. And I think they're going to have to figure out how they fit into that ahistorical moment with something a little bit more novel than the recycled tactics and bumper sticker slogans that they've used.
Okay, I want to get everyone to respond to that. I do have to take a quick commercial break. And we'll also hear from the Conservative leader himself a little bit later on this afternoon, I anticipate. On the other end of that break, our panelists will be back as we await Mark Carney's entrance, or exit, I should say, from Rideau Hall, and he will take questions from reporters. We'll take you there live as soon as that happens. We're back in a moment with our special coverage of Mark Carney swearing in.
Senna, from the Senna flower plant, is an effective ingredient in Senecot laxatives, gently relieving occasional constipation. Senecot helps you achieve poophoria. Using the power of natural Senna, it works overnight to promote bowel movement and helps you poop. If it's hard to pass, try Senecot S. It's Senna plus a stool softener that hydrates and softens poop and keeps it moving comfortably. Achieve poophoria with the gentle overnight relief of Senecot.
We're all busy, but sometimes we put off the important things, like helping to provide financial protection for your family.
if the worst happens.
Welcome to Cover Direct. You're speaking to Sally. How can I help you?
Hi, your commercial for family life insurance says I can get coverage over the phone with no complicated forms.
Yes, that's right. You can arrange everything in just one phone call. If you're a Canadian resident aged 18 to 70, you can apply for up to $1.5 million in coverage and help give your family some peace of mind.
Great.
You won't need a medical or a blood test to get approved. You just need to answer a few health and lifestyle questions.
Sounds great.
If you choose $100,000 of coverage, it could be as little as $10.87 a month for the first year. That's just 36 cents a day.
That's less than I thought.
Family life insurance is exclusive to Cover Direct. You can't buy it anywhere else.
Sounds great. I'll go right ahead.
We're Canada's most trusted direct life insurance provider. To get a free, no-obligation quote, call one of our trusted insurance advisors today at 1-844-934-3220 or visit coverdirect.ca.
Swiss Chalet's Seafood Fest is back. Hurry in for Canada's famous rotisserie chicken paired with garlic shrimp, our delicious fish and chips, fish sandwich, or our popcorn shrimp appetizer. All here for a limited time, starting from only $16.99, only at Swiss Chalet.
We're just taking advantage of what Mother Nature's been doing right from the get-go. These grasses all evolved under a grazing dynamic, and we're trying to really mimic what the buffalo did. And it's just going to feed this whole landscape and a society.
Representation in media is important.
There's a lot of people with disabilities that don't feel seen.
I'm a music producer. Having a disability is not really shown in the industry.
I make media representing women in wheelchairs.
AMI is a broadcaster that strives to change the way people think about disability.
I'm a very loud and proud deaf woman, and I want to be able to make a difference.
Watch inclusive and accessible content on AMI TV or stream now at AMIplus.ca.
Welcome back to our special coverage here on CTV of Mark Carney swearing in. He has just become the 24th Prime Minister of this country. Cabinet was also sworn in, a new-ish cabinet, you could say, new technically very much so. 23 different ministers, 24 the total size of cabinet. When you include Mark Carney, that's down from 37, the most recent tally under former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. We are minutes away, I anticipate, from taking you live to Rideau Hall. I believe we can show you the shot right there. Mark Carney himself will be speaking. Some of the ministers, I believe, behind him any moment now. And when that happens, he will take questions from reporters as well. We are told we will take you there live. I am here with Scott Reed, Lisa Raitt, Nick Nanos, and Kathleen Monk. Before we went to break, we were talking a little bit about opposition positioning. And in particular, Scott had raised the Conservatives and where this heads from here if, in fact, an election is called in the next 10 days. Your thoughts on their positioning, why we've seen the polls go the way we have over the last 6 weeks, and what you anticipate, Nick?
Well, I'm not sure there's very much that the Conservatives can do in the next 7 days because it's going to be like the Carney show, right? Especially with his trip to Europe. So he's basically stacked it up to basically jam the news. I think this is a bit of a Doug Ford strategy. He's going to go to Europe. He's got to come back with something that might annoy President Trump, and then Trump will start engaging Mark Carney. I agree, Kathleen, there's not going to be a meeting face-to-face because that would be way too risky for Mark Carney. But I think for the Conservatives, they're probably going to have a bit of a holding strategy in the short term, basically to try to connect Mark Carney and this cabinet to the previous administration and to show that it's not really big change. But it's going to be a change election because we have a new person that's Prime Minister, and we have also Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives that are poised on the time for change. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Kathleen, we do anticipate we'll hear from both the leader of the federal Conservatives as well as the leader of the NDP in the next few hours to get their reaction. What are your thoughts on their positioning ahead of an election call?
So quickly on the Conservatives, I think, I want to give them a bit of credit here because for 2 years they ran a very effective strategy, but the whole script has been rewritten by, the reality TV president, Donald Trump. He has rewritten the script and they're struggling with their pivot. But they have the money, the resources, the research, the army behind them to probably do so. But they certainly have not figured out what that message is yet. You can see them struggling in the ads that they're putting out there and how the leader is responding. So they're going to need to settle on something quick. The challenge, as Nick has just pointed out, that all of the oxygen, all of the media oxygen will be sucked up by Mark Carney in the coming weeks, and just because of all the incoming rockets from Donald Trump. In terms of New Democrats, they have been drowned out. The leader has failed to resonate with Canadians in this what we are in this economic war. So today and whenever an election is called, they need to change the narrative. They need to get back on ground that is safe for New Democrats. New Democrats protect people. They've brought in major programs into this country, obviously, like the Canadian Pension Plan, like health care. They have to go back to that we need to be elected as New Democrats to ensure that these two other right-wing leaders don't cut your social programs and that you're protected. So go back to that safe ground about where our values are aligned with Canadian values. And they can only hope to do that, frankly, when there's an even playing field of an election where media and resources are limited in some ways, that attention has to be given to all the party leaders.
We're standing by, if you're just joining us, to take you live to Rideau Hall, where we anticipate we will hear from the newly sworn-in Prime Minister, Mark Carney. He'll take some questions from reporters, and we'll take you to that microphone as soon as it happens. Lisa, I wanted to get you in as well, of course, on sort of, let's start with the Conservatives and kind of the challenges that they face in this moment in time, given what all three of the other panelists, rather, have laid out, and how you anticipate that they will navigate those.
So it's interesting because just because we think that Mark Carney is experiencing a momentum and that he is the change candidate, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to translate down to votes at the door. And the why I say that is on Sunday last week, the same day as the Liberal leadership race concluded, Pierre Poilievre had a really big rally in southwestern Ontario and London, Ontario, 2,500 people. They came out to see him. And, the call went out to all of the ridings saying, please come out for the rally. And people showed up. And I think that motivated vote is going to be really important. It's a vote that Conservatives know that they have to place. And as a result, there's going to be, as you say, great efficiency in our vote. We're going to get it all out. What does the party have to do? Two things. First of all, they have to continue to hammer on that this is a Liberal government seeking a fourth mandate, because that is the fact. The second thing they have to do is to illustrate and show as best they possibly can that Mark Carney may say he wants to get rid of the carbon tax, but maybe he actually doesn't want to do it, and that you can't trust him to actually do it because he doesn't think it's a bad policy. He just thinks that you were told a bunch of stuff by the Conservatives to change your mind. You're not really feeling the pinch. And I think that's where they have to go.
I think my guess would be, Scott, and I could be wrong, but I think they'll try to get the carbon tax thing. I think they would acknowledge, the people around Mark Carney, that it has been a huge vulnerability, and they will try to get that from a policy perspective done if they can, because I understand there were some challenges around not being in Parliament. Try to get it done as soon as possible to remove that as a tension point.
Sure.
Or try to remove it.
They'll try. I mean, look, just in response to what Lisa was saying around carbon tax and fourth Liberal government, I agree. I don't see those as two things. I see those as one thing. That's one thing that the Conservatives have to do, which is to bring Mark Carney down to earth and try to beat him up a little bit and make it harder on him. Sure, they got to do that. But they have to do one other thing. Let's be honest. Because we are in such an unprecedented moment, because we are under such an unprecedented attack from Donald Trump, because it affects people's jobs and livelihoods, ultimately, I cannot believe that the person who wins this election will not also be the person that Canadians have the most confidence in to manage the Canada-U.S. file. And Pierre Poilievre is going to have to pass that test. He's going to have to beat Mark Carney on that specific test. That's not going to be done with an ad that criticizes Mark Carney or that just pounds away on the carbon tax and Trudeau. They're going to have to meet that specific test. I'll say one other thing, because I disagree with I think with most people here. I know that going to the Oval Office is a risk. I know that sitting down next to Trump, it could go crazy, could go haywire, could turn into a UFC cage match. But the river to re-election runs through the White House. I can't imagine that there won't be a moment in the middle of this campaign, especially with April 2nd coming up, where Carney as a new prime minister doesn't end up face-to-face, man-to-man, haircut to haircut with Donald Trump. And I wouldn't be all that afraid of being Zelensky. What does that mean? If he treats him disrespectfully, Carney can tell him to go fly a kite and Canadians will cheer. If he could come away with some kind of détente, some kind of a deal that saves jobs, well, then that's a win. I'm not sure it's the slam dunk crazy nut bar risk that people are portraying it as.
Okay, go ahead quick, and then I want to play something because Marco Rubio just commented.
You know, if you think of Donald Trump, you know, why would he even meet someone who hasn't been elected prime minister? Like, let's face it.
Well, he's a new prime minister. I mean, this is the way our system works.
Donald Trump's going to say, you've never been elected dog catcher. Why would he, you know, Donald Trump is the president of the United States. You know, the thing is, you know, I still think, Scott, it would be a big risk. You know, maybe it could work out, maybe it not. But I think it would be the advantage of Trump, who wants to disrupt things, would want to take a shot and kind of try to influence the outcome of the next election.
You're 25 behind. You're 25 points behind.
Yeah.
5 weeks ago, you're 25 points behind. Take a risk. Spin the wheel. Grab the brass ring.
Okay, speaking of that, while we wait for Mark Carney to step up to the microphone, over in Charlevoix, Quebec, G7 foreign ministers have been meeting. Mélanie Joly actually couldn't make the swearing-in ceremony because she couldn't get back in time. She remains foreign affairs minister. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was just at the closing press conference and was pushed by reporters on the threats to Canada's sovereignty, which he had said going into this meeting he did not want to talk about or did not want to be the focus of the agenda. Have a listen to what he said in response.
I know that we're not speaking about Canada becoming the 51st state at this meeting, but I'm asking you now, do you consider what the president has said about Canada becoming the 51st state? Is he serious?
You know, I'll tell you how that came about, okay? He's in a meeting with Trudeau, and Trudeau basically says that if the U.S. imposes tariffs on Canada, Canada couldn't survive as a nation state, at which point the president said, well, then you should become a state. And that's where this began. That said, the president has made an argument for why. He says he loves Canada. He says he made an argument for why Canada would be better off joining the United States from an economic perspective and the like. He's made that argument repeatedly, and I think it stands for itself.
But is it counterproductive?
The Trump administration is expecting.
Okay, that's Secretary of State Marco Rubio doubling down on the threats that we've heard from Donald Trump about his view around making Canada the 51st state. Kathleen, I'll get you to jump in. It sort of emphasizes, or it's emblematic of everything we've been talking about how much of an issue this will continue to be over the coming, I mean, gosh knows how long, but particularly from an election perspective over the coming weeks.
I just got one phrase. If this is love, Marco Rubio, what Donald Trump is doing to us, I got a different perspective on what love is. Yeah, I think he's going to continue to dominate. It's not going to, the relationship won't change over the course of whether the election is only 36 days or even longer. Carney will be dealing with this full time, and that's why the polling is so volatile. That's why we see people, you know, they're loose. The universe for the Liberal voters is opening up. It's moving away from Conservatives. They're fleeing back to what it seems like someone who they feel right now is the stable choice, who has the resume and the credentials to go up against what many Canadians consider to be, you know, the madman in the White House.
Do you think that narrative changes at all with more specifics added to what Mark Carney will do, who he intends to be as prime minister? Because he has largely, I mean, he did some media, he did some, you know, questions during the campaign, but Scott, and this isn't like a partisan point, like he just really, it was like the headline around him, the idea of him that clearly I think all public opinion polling now points to resonated. If there's less of just the idea and more specifics, is that a risk, or is the momentum, do you think, in his corner?
Well, it does feel like momentum's in his corner, but you're exactly right. I mean, an idea is always more powerful than reality, especially when you seem to be tailor-made for the moment. And so almost anything you say, anything you do runs the risk that it might disabuse people, that you fulfill their dreams of what that idea could be. So, yeah, there's no question. I actually think that's his biggest challenge, is how do we maintain this focus? How do you maintain this momentum? How do you put, you know, meat on the bones in a 36, 37-day campaign, meeting the media, meeting Canadians, you know, over and over and over again, without polluting, without complicating this critical, simple question that you want people to vote on: who is best to take on this lunatic in the Oval Office?
Oh, okay. Well, and Lisa, your thoughts on that?
Sorry, I don't normally stop talking.
I thought there would be another couple of minutes.
I'm not used to it, Scott. My goodness.
Yeah, what happened? I'm going to go back to the Oval Office point. I think my spidey sense on that meeting yesterday, it did not go as well as the ministers or Doug Ford have said. I think that the Canadian delegation probably got a stern talking to. and may have been told a little bit more about the length of the timeline we're looking at to get to some kind of ground where we're going to be feeling more comfortable vis-a-vis our United States relationship. You know, the fallback on saying it was all about process just to me screams that there's a significant problem there. So Mr. Carney is going to have to deal with this situation in the long term, whether or not he goes in and meets Donald Trump right now, when it seems Donald Trump and all the people around him are just digging in on the issue as being something that they fundamentally believe in from an ideological point of view. I just think it's tough.
Yeah, I think you're right. I spoke to someone who was well briefed on the call, and the meeting yesterday, which was 90 minutes long. Apparently, the tone was much more civil, and it was not like yelling at each other. But at the same time, they walked away very certain that those tariffs on April 2nd, not just applied to Canada, but around the world, are coming. Like, that is their restructuring of trade policy. They intend to implement it, and that they will negotiate on a country-by-country basis after about escaping those tariffs or exemptions. And Canada will likely be near the top of the list, but that's kind of the substance of what they ended up walking away with. I do want to swing over to my colleague Michael Couture, who is on the ground at Rideau Hall as we wait for Mark Carney to step up to the microphone and take questions from reporters. Mike, I know you're in constant contact with people in and around the Prime Minister. What are they telling you, I should say, about the possibility of a White House trip, if anything?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I think a lot is up in the air, especially when you consider whether or not he will be making a trip to Europe first. I think trying to figure out exactly how the next week will play out, that is job number one, and trying to get an idea of where they will go and whether or not they would accept that type of a meeting, I think is an interesting question as well. To Scott's point, could it be a win either way for somebody like Mark Carney to show that he's standing up to Donald Trump, even if he gets to sit there in the Oval Office and potentially undergoes some sort of a berating like the J.D. Vance, the Vice President, and President Donald Trump did do for Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president. So interesting to see whether or not that will play out in any way, shape, or form. But Carney has been clear in, the last time he had spoken about this, he says he will only take that meeting if there is the clear basis that Canada is a sovereign country. And that is agreed upon going into it. So, hearing what we just heard from Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, it sounds like we're not at that starting point just yet. And it sounds like that meeting wouldn't be possible right now. But that is certainly something that I think people will want to ask Mark Carney when he does come out here at taking those questions for the first time as Prime Minister, as well as a whole host of other questions. And we also understand that there will be some sort of a statement and possible announcement from him going forward on some sort of initiative and exactly the direction of his country, of his government, and where he wants to take this country. So I think that a lot of people are waiting to hear that, to get an idea of where to go next with questions for Mark Carney, not the least of which is, what does the next week look like, and when are we coming back to Rideau Hall? Because we all know that he has to come back here if he is going to call an election, and we are widely expected that we are not going back to Parliament Hill at all for the sitting of the House of Commons, which is supposed to come back on March the 24th. We're likely getting on campaign buses before then. Vashi?
Yeah, let's lay out some of the markers over the coming hours and coming days, because you mentioned a couple of them. First of all, today, and we should say it looks like there's some action in and around the podium, so maybe Mark Carney is coming out soon. We certainly will listen in live as soon as that happens. After that, there's a cabinet meeting, and then we anticipate that he is headed to Europe next week. Lay out a bit more about what we know is set to come.
Yeah, so following that, and I say following that with that possible, again, trip to Europe that we have not gotten any confirmation on, but certainly strongly hinted at. Then there will be the days of coming back to Canada and governing in some way. And I say governing without the House of Commons back. I think we can all, start with that as a starting point. But what does he do in terms of the Canada-US file to try and send any kind of clear marker, or are other ministers going to go down to the United States again for another meeting? Like we saw yesterday with François-Philippe Champagne and Dominic LeBlanc. Now Dominic LeBlanc in that new portfolio, and clearly he will be spearheading those conversations with Howard Lutnick and others in the United States, the Commerce Secretary. And so where does that go from here, I think is a big question as well, and how his team will try and tackle and really put their hands on the levers of government and make their mark. They don't have a large window to do that, Vashi. I mean, I think that has been underscored by Lisa and a number of other panelists. They have only days now, let's be honest about this, until they can tell Canadians and show proof positive to Canadians that, yeah, we have made change in this government. That's not a huge window. We all know that, yes, those ministers will remain in place. They will be ministers through the campaign. So if they do need to go down to D.C. to take some sort of action on the trade file, they will be doing that. But at the same time,